second point. Since God rules us with forgiveness, we must find forgiveness. Again, that's quote by Stott, forgiveness is as indispensable to the soul as food is to the body. We see great forgiveness in this story. He tells his brothers, Joseph tells his brothers, come near to me. The same brothers who sent him away as a slave, he's bringing them near to him. The same brothers who sold him for money, he has given them money and food for sustenance. Joseph was put in great danger, but he is giving them safety. See, Joseph has received great forgiveness from God, and therefore he is giving great forgiveness from God. This reminds us of the parable of Jesus in Matthew 18, the unforgiving servant. A servant owed the king $10,000. The king brings him up, says, do you have the money? He says, no, I don't have the money. He pleads for patience. He pleads for mercy. And the king says, all right, I'll wipe away the debt. Go about your business. That servant then goes find somebody who owes him $100 and beats him and throws him in prison. The king then goes after that servant who beat and put in prison another man. He says, I showed you great mercy. How do you not go and show this other man great mercy? And the man is more punished than he was to begin with. See, the point of that parable is to show us that if we receive great forgiveness, we ought to be giving great forgiveness. It's a sign of a true disciple of Christ, that we forgive one another because we have been forgiven. Joseph also reflects Jesus Christ in this story. He seeks out those who are far off. He seeks out his own enemies. He forgives those who are putting him to death. Now we look at Joseph and we say, this is fantastic. How does this man have this kind of power to forgive? How has he found the ability to forgive these brothers who have been so mean and so nasty? I can tell you this, the power didn't come from within him. The power came from outside of him. The power to forgive like this is only a power that comes from above. When we are born from above in Jesus Christ by the Spirit, we receive this kind of power to forgive. This isn't something that bubbles up from our own hearts. No, that's where envy and jealousy and anger come from. No, God, He alone gives this kind of power to forgive. Now, it's not all great for Joseph. Remember, he begins this by weeping. This is the third time we've seen him weep. Chapter 42, verse 23, after the brothers admit that they killed their brother, they killed Joseph right in front of him, he weeps. In 43:30, after he sees Benjamin for the first time, he weeps. Joseph weeps again now. And I think this is a weeping of joy. He's wept in pain, he's wept in celebration. I believe this is weeping in joy. But there's certainly pain here. The mixed emotions that come over him. Here are these brothers who are now loving one another, and he's weeping because he sees their love. He's weeping because he wants reconciliation. One of the most important things to focus in here as Joseph weeps is that broken relationships are painful. He's going to be a great forgiver, a great lover of his brothers, but the most important thing to focus here is that broken relationships are painful. Relationships are difficult because we are all sinners. Attaching yourself to another sinner in the way that you're going to be dependent upon them, it's painful. And it's difficult because we're all selfish, but because we all hurt one another either knowingly or unknowingly. So the most important thing to realize in our relationships is our own sin. It's the most important thing for us to focus on in our own relationships. Not how other people wrong us, but how we wrong others. See, if that's what you focus on, how others wrong you, you become self-righteous and judgmental. But if you always remember, I'm a sinner and I am wronging other people, when they sin against you, you're able to put that into a perspective. In the gospel perspective, I hope. Forgiving sins is ugly business. Sin is ugly. When we face sin, it is ugly. But we are called to forgive. I think two of the hardest phrases to say are, please forgive me, and I forgive you. These are two of the hardest phrases to say. Please forgive me, and I forgive you. Please forgive me is hard because it admits you've done something wrong. I forgive you is hard because it admits someone has hurt you. It also means you have to let go of that bitterness that somehow is always comforting. See, friends, we cannot have real relationships that glorify God if we are not acknowledging our own sin. We must deny our pride and admit our sin if we are going to glorify God. Now, I want to focus on one particular kind of forgiveness for the rest of our time at this point. It's how to forgive yourself. How to forgive yourself. I believe this is a big part of this. Joseph wants to give an explanation to the brothers. Do not be dismayed. God has been good through all of this. He doesn't tiptoe around their sin. He calls it out. He confronts it. But he's very clear. You have wronged me. And he's very clear that they need to not be dismayed about it. There's also an issue of how much have the brothers been able to forgive themselves. As he weeps over them, they talk with him. Now, this is better than what they used to do. They were talking about him while he was in a pit. But they're not weeping with him at this point. As we look at what it means to forgive yourselves, I do what every great scholar does. I Googled it, hoping that a Wikipedia page popped up on what it means to forgive yourself. Sadly, I did not find a Wikipedia page, but I did find some helpful resources, most of which came from Oprah.com. One source gave these steps to forgive yourself. This is how to find freedom from guilt. 1, reopen your heart. That's good advice. Don't get trapped in once you get hurt once or once you sin against someone else. Don't be afraid of another relationship. Reopen your heart. That's fine advice. Choose to love yourself. Now, I can appreciate this in the sense that I believe the biblical definition of love is to choose to put your affections on someone. And so the idea that you choose to love rather than fall in love, I can appreciate that about that step. Demystify your guilt. When we feel guilt, we shouldn't overblow it and make it the worst, make it more than it really is. Okay, I can appreciate that. Give yourself permission to heal. I really don't know what that means. I know I used to get permission to go in the hall at school. I don't know how to get permission to heal, but I'm trying to find the best in all of these. Create new relationships. That's helpful. The second source said this. Meditate. All right, if we were going to baptize this, make it Christian, put your thoughts on things above. Okay, we can meditate. We can think about something better. Next step, chant. Now, I just can't help myself but to think of the guy who looks in the mirror and says, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me. That one, the chanting is just gets difficult for me to really figure out what that means beyond the SNL skit. Journal, expressing your feelings, that's a good idea. I finally thought I got to it. The next step, the final step that I read, it was called atonement. It's from a Jewish rabbi. And as he described it, well, my optimism was destroyed. Serve others to make yourself feel better. Now, there's something that all these steps are missing. We can look at these and we can say these are good steps if in light of the gospel we're trying to do some of these, but they're all missing the most important thing. They're all doing the most dangerous thing. They're ignoring the sin. None of these are actually looking at the sin for what it is, face to face, and letting that real sin, the real offense of sin settle in. See, it's very important. Joseph does not tiptoe around the sin. I'm Joseph, the one you sold into slavery. So they all have this one thing in common. They ignore sin. They want you to get past your guilt, not really let it be dealt with. And I know why, because if you don't have Jesus Christ to deal with your guilt, you can only ignore it. Because only God Himself, who declares the great word of forgiveness, can truly deal with your guilt. You have to have a reality that truly says you are forgiven. And the cross of Jesus Christ is the only reality that truly gives forgiveness. The world says ignore your guilt because there's no solution. The gospel says be free from your guilt because of Jesus Christ. He died so that we are no longer held accountable for our sins. If you want freedom from guilt, you're not going to get it in doing these practices. You'll get some kind of temporary relief. If you want real freedom from guilt, you take your sin to Jesus Christ and you see the power of the gospel. You see the power of cross. You see the power of the resurrection. And you know that His word speaks louder than your own sin. Friend, only the Christian gospel truly frees us from guilt. If you're not a Christian this morning, if you have bitterness built up and you're longing for that freedom, you can find it by placing your faith in Jesus Christ. He has died for the sins of all who believe in Him. He speaks a word to our soul that gives us great comfort. As John Stott said, forgiveness is like food to the soul. It's like fresh water. You're longing for something to quench the bitterness, to give you some relief. It's only the power of God that can do that.